Right, hi, listen up. This is your Prime Minister speaking. You're listening to the Electric EV podcast.
Hello, Merry Christmas, and welcome to another episode of the Everything EV podcast, the podcast dedicated to everything electric. I'm your host, Charlie Atkinson, and in these episodes we'll be discussing everything to do with electric travel, so whether it be cars, bikes, boats, or even planes, we'll have it covered. We'll also be speaking to people from within the industry to get their views on the EV space, as well as other features such as electric car reviews, electric motorsport coverage, and much, much more along the way. This podcast is available on all streaming platforms, so be sure to subscribe to wherever you get your podcast from to receive every single episode as soon as it's released. And please do go back and check out all our other episodes too. In this special Christmas episode, we're joined by comedian and impressionist Rory Bremner. As well as his work on award-winning shows such as Rory Bremner Who Else and his incredible collection of impressions of British politicians, Rory has also been working with Audi to help debunk some of the most common myths surrounding EV ownership on the manufacturer's YouTube channel. In this episode, Rory is here to break down those myths and to share his thoughts on the EV industry in general. We may also hear a few other familiar voices along the way too. So, Rory, welcome to the podcast, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. Now, I usually start these podcasts with a question about electric vehicles, but for someone that does a lot of political impressions and has a lot of political material, the last few months for you must have just felt like Christmas, surely.
Yeah. I mean, you may say that, Charlie, but I think for impressionists, it is Christmas. It is Christmas. I think we are getting all of our, and if this is Christmas, Charlie, then I have to say, as Prime Minister, I am the turkey. I'm the turkey. But yes, I mean it is. But it's been like this for about 3 or 4 years. I think it was Lenin, actually, or it might have been, yes, or it might have been Richard Madeley, who said there are decades where nothing happens for weeks, and then there are weeks where decades happen. And I mean, just it's happening so quickly. I think it started a few years ago when they made Tony Blair the Middle East peace envoy. And I've got to say, Charlie, obviously, that was the job I did for a couple of years, and mission accomplished on that. And then but then the last few years, we've had Donald Trump, Charlie, and that the world just went into a different kind of orbit. And so life became very interesting, and the guys who were in charge were much more satirical, much weirder. And then, of course, we had Boris, and the whole thing has gone into a flat spin. They always used to say the trouble with political jokes is they get elected, and that's what's happened. And honestly, it's part of my job to make politicians look more ridiculous than they already are. But that is, I can't tell you how hard that job is right now. Although also, in many ways, it's not funny at all, because the things that Trump and Boris are getting up to, are under the bonnet, if I could use a motoring metaphor, are quite scary and reprehensible. But obviously the way that I come to it is through impressions and through comedy. And every now and again, the two sort of meet. Obviously our social distancing rules for a long time, it was you could meet with 6 people from 2 families, which until recently, that was Boris's family, essentially, was 6 people from 2 families. Although I think Charlie, it's 6 from 3 families, although I was still in the second family when I had the 6th and indeed the 5th. So if you've come into contact with me and you're listening to this podcast, you've come into contact with me in the last 10 years and have a child, get a test. Get a test is what I say. So yeah, it's a full-time job keeping up right now, because the world has gone very mad. We have these strong leaders around the world, Putin and Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Orban in Hungary, and Xi, and just the world is going kind of quite mad. So as an impressionist or a satirist, you're struggling to keep up.
Yeah, one thing I did want to ask about is that obviously you do a lot of amazing political impressions, but with everything going on at the moment, I suppose it can feel quite draining to keep up to date with everything. And for someone who has to live and breathe that political world for their work, does it not wear you down and tire you out when we're in times like these?
Well, yeah, you do. As I say, you do live and breathe it, and there is plenty of material. It's true, but as John Fortune used to say, when people say, "Oh, you must have so much material," he'd sort of hand them a pen and say, "Well, do you want to write it then?" But I mean, We are talking sort of early December, and in the midst of all this thing about Downing Street parties and stuff, we just heard that the Prime Minister has had another child. His wife has had another baby, and I actually did tweet today. I said, I don't know, whoever is writing this script has just gone bonkers, because it's just, I kind of think sometimes that we're living in a box set. And it's twists and turns, and Boris last year going into intensive care, that was the sort of series finale, that was sort of cliffhanger ending, and then we began the next series with his wife having a baby last year, and now she's having another one this year. So it is, I mean, I kind of say that what I try to do is I try to make sense of stuff first and then make nonsense of it. So I have to try and understand what's going on, and then try to understand what I think about it, and then try and translate that into what's comic. And that is, as I say, that's a process that is kind of challenged, let's say, every day. We look back at the pandemic. We had a choice. We had a choice whether to let the virus rip through our care homes and our elderly people and with thousands of unnecessary deaths, or to shut down large swathes of the economy and risk a recession. And I think it's fair to say we uniquely amongst Western governments, we did both. So I think we did a double shift there. So but I mean, I kind of think it's important to have a point of view in comedy as well. Otherwise, you're just writing a whole bunch of jokes. And I think it's for me, I've always liked, certainly the last 20 years or so, to kind of ally the comedy that I do to what I kind of make of what's going on. But it is a little bit of a challenge. I sometimes think that losing your sense of humor is another COVID symptom. You lose your sense of smell, you lose your sense of taste, then eventually you lose your sense of humor, because there have been things happening in the last few weeks, whether it's about breaching the code of conduct, or lobbying, or government just coming out with all sorts of stories about parties and just all sorts of nonsense, and you just think, no, this is just a shambles, or clown car, I think somebody described it as. But it is a shambles of a government. Don't want to be too political.
No, absolutely, and we will try and keep it light, I promise. But obviously, we're talking to you today because of your work with Audi, and you've been an ambassador for them for a number of years now. But recently, you've been talking about electric vehicles, and so I suppose now you're not just an ambassador for Audi, but you're also an ambassador for electric vehicles. So could we just start with your history of electric vehicles and when you were first introduced to them? So just talk us through your EV journey.
Well, it's a relatively swift journey and a relatively recent one. I mean, I've been doing stuff with Audi for 7-8 years, maybe a little bit, maybe even longer than that. I just always loved Audis, loved doing stuff with them, loved doing shows for them. I've for many years had Q7, but I think increasingly, not just because of COP26 and stuff like that, but increasingly you were thinking, right, okay, what can I do in my own life to reduce using fossil fuels, to kind of reduce the carbon footprint and all that. And we had a house in Scotland about 10-12 years ago, and the first thing that I did there was to put in a biomass boiler instead of the sort of old-fashioned boiler that we sort of inherited there. And we moved out recently, but the great thing was for 12 years, thinking that for 12 years we didn't have a single sort of oil delivery there. And obviously that was in terms of heating, but in terms of actually motoring and driving, I try to take the train when I can, but the biggest sort of thing that you can do is, think now, can I get towards hybrid, or even better, get towards an electric car? Of course, there are questions about, how the energy is produced in the first place, the electricity, whether it's renewables and all the rest of it. And there's that whole thing, and also how much it takes in terms of carbon footprint, actually building the cars and sourcing the batteries and that sort of thing. But at the consumer end of it, to be able to say, it's one thing to sort of sing the praises of a Q7 or a Q5, Q7 particularly, but then you are laying yourself open to people saying, well, that's still a big kind of quite a heavy sort of diesel car, still in many areas, there's more of a sort of carbon tax on that. So I said to Audi, it's much easier now to talk about the future and talk about clean cars and clean energy and electric vehicles. So along came the e-tron to try, and absolutely loved it. I mean, it's like a flying carpet to me. It's incredibly smooth, and I'm not just saying this as a sort of because they're paying me to say it, which they're not, because they're not paying me to say anything. But it's just an incredibly smooth experience, because you sort of think, well, what's it going to be if you get to an electric car? The first thing you notice, of course, is how much smoother and quieter it is, to the extent that there are even people who are being paid now as we speak to make up noise for electric cars. Because, of course, if you have completely silent electric cars, what does that happen to the urban landscape, soundscape, I should say? And, people can't hear them coming, or this or that. But I do love the idea. I bumped into somebody from McLaren the other day, whose job it was literally is to sort of sit there and say, okay, do we want it to sound like this? Do we want it to sound like this? Do we want it to sound like this? And they're literally playing sounds to kind of imagine. And it's funny, in life as well, when you've used one of those ATM cash point machines, those things, the holes in the wall, and as it counts out your money, and you hear it going, it counts out the money. It's not counting out the money at all. That's just a little soundtrack. So we're having to kind of engineer these things. So the first thing, as I say, you just notice the smoothness and the quietness, the stealth almost of it. But what I noticed particularly with the e-tron again was just the extraordinary acceleration, and that's just on the ordinary e-tron. Well, it's the 55 rather than the 50. But the 55 e-tron is how quickly and silently it picks up, and you're off. And as I say, it's like a sort of like a flying carpet, really. And so I'm really enjoying that. But then, of course, you have to adapt. There's no question. I mean, part of the reason was when we bought this house we're in at the moment, we inherited a Tesla electric charger on the wall, and luckily that works for the Audi. So we're lucky enough to have very easily a charger at home, and that's the main thing, because you stick it on there every night or every other night, or however often you need it, and in the morning you have a full tank and off you go. And so originally, if you're driving locally, all that sort of need to think about, God, where are the charging points and how much range do I have and all that, you don't have to worry about that. But then comes the sort of things when there are certain things you have to do with an electric car, and you have to be prepared, you have to be organized. And a friend of mine who's Ian Dale, in fact, who's does a lot of journalism and a lot of political journalism, and I think recently he's just got the fully sort of sported up RS e-tron GT, and I sort of been sending him notes saying, right, okay, these are the apps you need to get. You need to get apped up. You need to know where your local chargers are and all this and that. And that's what you do. I think if you're getting into electric vehicles, you'll know this, because people listening to this will be familiar. But you can't have enough apps, whether it's ZapMap or whether it's Electric Highway or whether it's a really good one, which I found, which is a better route planner, which is ABRP. I don't know if you come across this, you probably have. A better route planner, ABRP. And you put into that the car that you've got, the model that it is, the percentage of charge you have on the battery, and that sort of can be your sort of original setting. And then you say, right, I'm here. Let's say I'm in Oxfordshire. I need to get to you in Northamptonshire. I've got 20% of battery left. The journey is going to be 60 miles. Where do I stop? And we did this, for example, from going from where we are now in Oxfordshire, going up to the Scottish borders. And it said, right, okay, stop for 15 minutes at I think it was Frankley services on the M5, and stop for half an hour somewhere sort of near Knutsford, Manchester on the M6, and you're done. But of course, the first thing that happens is that the charger at the first services wasn't working. But I have found there's a wonderful, my current favorite electric charging thing, which is I think it's around about junction 27 of the M6, and there's a battery there. There's the future. There's a battery of about 7 or 8 high power electric chargers, so there's always likely to be one free. They maintain them really well. It's almost exactly halfway between us and Scotland. It's got a very nice little Costa coffee place there, so you just nip in there, plug it in, 25 minutes, do your coffees, do your email, and you've got another 150, 160 miles of charge.
Yeah, when you describe that lifestyle of living with an electric car, it always blows my mind when I talk to people who haven't experienced living with one and running one and managing one, because they have all these ideas about what it might be like, but when you actually own one and live with one, it's much easier, and it's probably completely different to what you think it's going to be like, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I've just done a whole series of about, I think it's 5 little videos for Audi about sort of myth busting. And the first, I mean, one of the first, they said, there are people who think that you can't put an electric car through a car wash. Because I think the idea you'll electrocute yourself. So there were things like that. So you have to, that was one of the myths. And other things about range. Now, range isn't a myth, because obviously it is an issue. And I've had my nightmares. I've done the hard yards. I mean, I have, a couple of times I've been about 25, 30 miles away from home, and with 10 miles of charge left, and it's been cold and raining, and I couldn't find the charger that I want. But that should, in a way, you think, oh God, this should really frustrate you. But actually, I'm quite phlegmatic. I go quite Zen-like, and I think, well, at the end of the day, that's a little bit of pain that I take for the fun of having a car, which day in, day out normally is so smooth and so quiet and so calm and so not burning fossil fuels and all that stuff. So actually the experience of going to petrol stations, because partly with during COVID, all the rest of it, you sort of think, well, if you're handling all the pumps all the time, and you got this sort of the grubby diesel pumps, and so you get into the car, your hands are smelling of diesel. You bought a whole lot of chocolate at the checkout because you couldn't resist that. It was cold and rainy, you had to sort of get out of the car and walk up to the whatever it is. So all of this, and that all goes out of the window. So you lose all that, and also that stuff of going around and saying, oh my God, £1.54 a litre. Even though you pay more than that for a bottle of water, wouldn't you? If you're at a restaurant, you'd pay. It always kind of amuses me when people say, "I can't believe that diesel is £1.55 a litre." And I think, well, how much did you just pay for that bottle of Evian water that you had with lunch? But even so, we all do it. We all sort of, whenever we pass a Shell or a BP or a Total Garage, we always go past and think, oh yeah, oh God, 147, that 138. So all of that sort of price comparisons, all of that thinking, gosh, where am I going to fill up? That obviously goes out of the window. But the range stuff does come in. So, okay, first thing is you need to be really, really apt up. And as I say, ABRP is a really good one, ZapMap, Electric Highway, BP has got their own one, Pulse, all the rest of it. There's one thing which is really changing, which is great, which I think, so this is the government should be thanked for this. Let me tell you, Charlie, that I always forgot your name there. I'm always doing that. I do that with my own children. But I think the government, in its wisdom, in its great wisdom, has stipulated that if you have a new electric charging point in the public domain, it has to be contactless. I think I'm right in saying. So, whereas even 6 months ago, when it still goes on, and there's still a bit of a legacy, but even 6 months ago, there was a thing that, you had to fiddle around with apps, and you had to sort of work out, you had to have a subscription or whatever. That is fading away as more new chargers come on stream, and they are contactless. So, for example, that sounds really geeky. For example, Charlie, there is a BP Pulse station up near Harlow, near Stansted Airport, where I happened to be a few weeks ago, and it's so it's just near Harlow, as they're just on the outskirts, and that is contactless. So you sort of swoop in. There's 2 of those side by side, and I had to wait for one of them one time, but you sort of swoop in, press go, put the contactless on there, and you hook up, and it's great. When it works, it's brilliant. It really is. As well, it's just when it doesn't work, and there are times when it won't work, and that's when you have to be a bit patient and tolerant. And I did get to home was I got about, I reckoned, about 16 or 17 miles away from home, and I had 12 miles of charge left, and I thought, oh, I'm going to have to charge. So I was at Membry Services, or close by. I thought, right, okay, Membry, this is what I'm going to do. And I looked on ZapMap, and eastbound had 2 chargers, westbound had 2 chargers, and unfortunately all 4 were out of service. Only so there was one which was eastbound, which was in service. And I just, as it happened, weirdly, I was queuing up, sort of thinking, what am I going to do here? And a friend happened to be at the next charger thing of all the charging points in all the world. He happened to be at the one next door, and he actually sort of ran me home, and I went back the next day, and lo and behold, the charger was working again. So you do have those experiences? I don't know, Char, have you had those things, when you have been caught out?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems to me, and I've been saying this a lot lately, but this year does feel as though it's been a bit of a turning point for the industry. And obviously, everyone's had their own horror stories with charging and range anxiety. I mean, actually, the first time I drove an EV was in Milton Keynes with an electric Mini, and I needed to charge it, and I had absolutely no idea how and where to go. But just working in the industry and talking to different people, it does feel as though we're getting to a stage now where more and more people are interested in them, and more people aren't put off by the usual things like price, range, and charging. Is that something you've noticed as well?
Yes, I have. But I mean, it really is. I mean, this is one of the things where the government talks of sort of big message with COP26 and all the rest of it. But I think they really do need to put pressure on the suppliers, because if they're going to go green, when we are all going to go green, we have to have the infrastructure there. And I mean, I don't know why in London, for example, I mean, I looked just yesterday, I was thinking, right, I had sort of 10, 15 minutes to spare. So I thought, right, I'm going to go on Zap Map and I'm going to just make sure I know where around me in London are the charges if I need to get to them. And I'm sure, again, if you look for them, like this gets really geeky, but if you're going out to London West at BP and Hammersmith, so just by the Hammersmith flyover, there's a bank of about 4 of them there, and there's often a few sort of people queuing, like stacking into, there's planes stacking into Heathrow. You've got a few cars sort of stacking in to get there, and I think there's another 4, I think, just underneath the flyover by Hammersmith Odeon, well, it used to be Hammersmith Odeon, it's now the Eventim Apollo or something, but it was a great sort of famous place where lots of shows took place and still do. Great rock shows take place. So just in that little area, there's the holy grail for EV people, which is a bank, so therefore more chance that you have one free, of working, so more chance that you'll find one working, and high voltage ones, because it's all very well that you see the lampposts that give you 7 kilowatts or whatever, but you're going to have to get out all the leads. I've not done this yet, by the way, but you're going to have to get out all the leads, you're going to have to plug all that in, and you're going to have to charge for overnight or something. So I don't know why in London, I think that's the thing. I don't know if it'll somehow, well, you tell me, you know much more about this, but if people, maybe supermarkets who have car parks or anyone who has parking space thinks that actually, hang on, it might be quite a good little earner for me if I put in 2 or 3 electric chargers there, and I'll have people coming in, and if they're waiting 20, 25 minutes to charge up, they'll have coffee here, they'll have something to eat here, they'll, if it's a Costa or a Starbucks or a Cafe Nero or something like that. And maybe we'll see more, just as because it's still relatively young, isn't it? But maybe we'll see more multi charging point bays, if you like. And I mean, it might be an opportunity. So if an entrepreneur say, right, I'm going to open up a new, like the equivalent of a drive-through, but it's a charging point, and I don't know, EV World could have a competition, to find the most user-friendly place. And as I say, I would nominate my one on the junction 27 of the M6, because it makes the whole thing so easy, because they're working, they're high voltage, there's a really good cafe next door, and all of these things. But heavens, how long have people been driving HGV trucks? And one of the many reasons why HGV drivers are in short supply is because the services and the resources and the kind of facilities for them are so useless and so poor that it's kind of like treated like second-class citizens. And I think it's not particularly comparable, except in just in the form of it, really. That for electric vehicles, if somebody thinks, okay, we've got more and more electric vehicles, they're going to need to be charged. Why don't we make charging a really simple, enjoyable process? And give them a cafe, give them various other things that they do, give them Wi-Fi so that they can do emails while the car is being charged. But it's still, it's something that's in its infancy. And working on. But as I say, I've had those horror stories, but surprisingly, it's one of these things. People who don't have electric cars complain about them, say, "Oh God, it's the range," and "Oh God, I couldn't do this and do that." But if you get one, you just factor it in. You just know, as I say, when you're looking at that car, you think, "Oh my God, I've got 12% of charge." And presumably, you then go to the app or whatever. You think, right, okay, I've got to find somewhere near here. And being Milton Keynes, there were quite a few charging points. So you then go through on your thing and think, right, which is the fast charger, which is over 50 kilowatts or 100 or 120. If I can get 120 kilowatts, how am I going to charge this in 20 minutes? And you just, every day is a school day, on the electric cars, and you just build up a little bank of knowledge. Okay, if I'm 25 miles from home, here are a range of places near home I can get to. And if you have a journey, same journey that you do all the time, it's different for me because I go all over the place. But if you have a journey that you do all the time, just stake out, okay, there are 2 or 3 places I can go. But so you just got to do the prep. And if you do the prep, and if you get the apps, and if you're prepared, then you'll still might get caught out every now and again. And also, if you've got less than 15% charge, let's say, or less than 30 or 40 miles to go, then you need to prioritize. You need to get to a point PDQ so that you don't get into the situation like I did the other night, where you think, I literally have not got enough charge to get home. Although I bailed out of the car. I bailed out and got a lift home with a friend because I had, I think, 17 miles left, and I thought, I'm not going to get home. And then when I picked up the car the next day, and I discovered that home was in the car 13 miles away. So I now know that if I break down, if I get to memory services, I now know that I do have I need 13 miles of charge to get home.
Okay, great. And now if we could just go back to some of your impressions, because obviously you're an amazing impressionist and an amazing comedian as well, and you've got so many great voices in your locker. So I was wondering if I could ask you a few EV specific questions and get you to answer them in some of your most well-known voices. And if we could start with Jeremy Clarkson. So Jeremy, have you finally been converted over to an electric vehicle?
Has Jeremy Clarkson been converted to the electric car?
No, I don't know. Well, actually, I mean, anyone who's watching The Farm, I mean,
I'm going through something of a metamorphosis.
He is. I mean, bless him, Jeremy is coming steaming into the 21st century. But what you've got to recognize with Jeremy, and I mean, I know him, he's a friend, that Jeremy, with him, he loves to be entertaining, whether it's writing a column or doing a broadcast. And so he can tend to be outrageous, and he can do some outrageous things, which even I would just say, Jeremy, you have gone too far here. But I mean, I think we all love the farm thing that he's doing now, and I think, I mean, underneath it all, there is a sensitive and an intelligent guy there. So I think while it's good copy for him to sort of mock the electric cars, I think, if they work and if they start to become particularly more user-friendly and more advanced, all the rest of it, then I think, he is like yourself, like many people listening to this who actually enjoy the technology and enjoy the science and think, we are developing, we are moving forward, we're perfecting us, and we're finding better uses of free energy and renewable energy. So
I think there's every chance that in a year or two, when I have to get rid of my diesel guzzling Lamborghini tractor, I will find myself the most eloquent advocate of EV cars in the world.
That is honestly amazing. But okay, up next, we've touched on COP26 already in this podcast, and so for David Attenborough, you must be a massive advocate of electric vehicles, surely.
Well, I think it's very clear that electric cars are here to stay.
And it's wonderful, isn't it? The COP26 tours, we have got 2 assets that the rest of the world can only envy, and that's the Queen and David Attenborough. And Boris Johnson's trying to kill both of them. The Queen by giving her COVID, and indeed David Attenborough by sitting next to him without a mask.
But I have to say, I mean,
we're all David Attenborough fans, aren't we?
I think, isn't it? It's incredible, isn't it, when we consider that we share 98% of our DNA with James May.
Or I always like, when I do my act, I talk about the outtakes from Blue Planet. So you'd have him saying,
our cameras have now reached the very bottom of the ocean. In hindsight, We should have tied them more securely to the boat.
But he is a wonderful advocate, and it was. I did enjoy COP26 because there were two. One of my favorite moments when Joe Biden fell asleep. That was great. When and nothing sort of says the full horror of global warming like Joe Biden waking up and finding out he's in Glasgow, which is great. And then we had Nicola Sturgeon meeting Greta Thunberg. So Nicola Sturgeon meeting Greta Thunberg. And it's a funny thing, Charlie. I don't know if you can imagine. It's a weird thing, because you've got Nicola and Greta. So, on the one hand, you've got this kind of weird, kind of slightly scary wee thing who's obsessed with just one issue. And then you've got Greta Thunberg. It's a funny thing. And what else do we have with COP26? We had I sent a message to a friend, said I'm going to do some COP related material, and my phone corrected it to copulated material. So I think the idea of Boris having a copulating conference in Glasgow, I think that is something to which I would go. I think even Vladimir Putin would find it hard not to attend that. And I don't think Donald Trump would pull out of that. Let me tell you, Charlie. I like the copulating conference. That's what I'm going to go to. So there we go. So what's the next one? So are we going to discuss electric vehicles as Julian Clary? I don't know. Are we going to do it as Alan Carr? I don't know. Anything can happen. Ask me anything. As Louis Walsh. Charlie, I don't think you know how good they are. These are great cars. I love them. I love what they do. Oh, Anson Deck. So I'm going to see how far this car goes.
Yeah, I did just want to ask, but actually, because as I said, you've got so many great impressions and people must come up to you and ask you to do their favourite ones all the time. But which ones are your favourite to do? Or have you got some niche ones that you maybe don't get to do quite as much?
Trump is a go-to because, you can carry a lot of information. And what I sometimes do with my corporate shows now is very often people can book a wonderful venue, really amazing venue. I was doing a show in Rome just last week, and interesting. So people would come to the show. They'd be in a villa in Rome. They'd be eating. They'd have the dinner. They'd have the awards ceremony, which I was hosting, and then they'd leave, and they'd have no real idea of kind of where they were. Apart from I'm in Rome. So I always kind of go on the internet and I look up where we are, and it was actually a place called the Villa Miana. So, and I get Trump to explain where they are. So he said, well, we're here in the Villa Melania. Okay. And I built this place. I built it for Melania. I built it in 1837. Okay. And then it was owned by the priests. But it's got a beautiful view. We can overlook the Vatican. You can down there, you can see St. Peter's, the famous St. Peter's Bazooka, and a wonderful thing. And the Vatican, where the chief rabbi hangs out. And so you talk partly a little nonsense, but also in the nonsense is a whole lot of truth. It's a bit like that radio program, The Unbelievable Truth. But in amongst the nonsense is the whole things which are true, because I like people to have, the older I get, the more I get curious. I love finding out stuff, and, I love hearing about stuff or reading about stuff. And so you can tell people where they are in the history of the venue. So Trump is a go-to character. What other characters are little niche ones that, not many people. I do. Well, Jacob Rees-Mogg, you see, because the computer. No, I've got to say I'm a great fan of the how can I put it? The internal combustion engine, or the motor car. He would call it motor car, wouldn't he? I'm a great fan of the motor car, and indeed, he's like something out of Gilbert and Sullivan, isn't he? Can you imagine? Here's a list of all the countries in Europe I can't stand. There's Portugal and Italy and Poland and Romania, the Netherlands, Germany and France, Lithuania, Sweden, Spain, and Hungary and Finland, Estonia, Slovenia, Slovakia, and maybe Macedonia. There's more of that, but you'll have to watch the act. So he's a fun character. But funnily enough, the ones that get the most response, I don't think I get much response from doing a Dominic Raab impression or a Keir Starmer. Particularly, all the Labour leaders since Blair sound like a version of Blair with a slightly strangled voice, like David Miliband or the Ed Miliband, rather. I just want to say to the people of this country, and I did that kind of, that kind of stone or gravestone, headstone thing, and I made my pledges to the British people, Charlie. I said to the British people, I'm never going to give you up. I'm never going to let you down. I'm never going to turn around and desert you.
That is absolutely fantastic. And now, on the subject of your impressions, and just to finish things up, obviously you do an amazing Boris Johnson, which we've heard a few times throughout this episode. So I was wondering, for the final episode of the year, could you deliver a Prime Minister's Christmas message to all our listeners?
Oh, well, I indeed, I would very much like to do that. And I'm going to do the 12 children. Of course, I have 12 children. I think some yes, 12 children of Christmas. But I think I'd like to say very, very Merry Christmas to all of your listeners. Indeed, and in your electric cars, I talked before about my experience driving Maseratis and Lamborghinis and the guttural sounds of the engine. But I think I have to salute. I have to salute the science of, and indeed the science of silence. And let me tell you, if you are doing a trip to, let's say, Barnard Castle or to Peppa Pig World, why not do it in a modern, sleek, smooth, and environmentally friendly electric vehicle? And that's very much my message to the nation. Now, if you excuse me, I've got 6 parties to go to.
That's all for this podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you liked this episode, then why not go back and listen to all our other episodes too. Please do subscribe to wherever you get your podcast from to make sure you get every single episode as soon as it's released. For daily news coverage, features and much more, you can also head over to evpowered.co.uk. Thanks once again for listening, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year for more episodes of the Everything EV podcast.